my background is I started off studying textile art. I graduated quite some time ago now from Goldsmiths College in textile art. And I was also very interested at that time also in critical theory. Goldsmiths was a very interesting place where different disciplines came together. So my background is in a training as an artist. I then went on to do a PhD in image studies because I couldn't find a program that would let me work in an interdisciplinary way at that time across visual art and popular culture in terms of looking at questions of the representation of identity. This was back in the mid-1990s. I then went on to do a PhD, which focused on the representation of Palestinian identity through visual art, through popular culture, through different types of representational practices in people's homes, in folklore, a whole range of things which I was trying to bring together. I didn't particularly want to look at the study of art as a field that was separate from the way in which people created representation. So I was trying to do something interdisciplinary. After that, I went on to work. I worked on the establishment of an archive of Palestinian art back in 1997 in East Jerusalem. It was a project to begin to archive Palestinian artists. And then after that, I went on to working on different educational projects with different NGO organizations. That was also followed by an initiative at Birzeit University, which was to establish a virtual gallery, which also would have an archival component. I worked on that in early 2000. I then moved back to the UK for a short bit of time where I was working with the Tate Online on ways in which to create mechanisms for searching their data, their archives, and ways in which different types of ways we could search their conferences, symposiums, and this was all, quite early on back in 2005. And then I was program leader. I was head of fine art at Winchester School of Art for a period of time before I came back to Palestine, where I was director of the International Academy of Art, where I was there for a good 10 years. And that program was in partnership with the Oslo National Academy of Art. And it was a particular BA program that was, flexible and open, and that it was all based on visiting lecturers and artists coming to Palestine and curators and thinkers to work with students across their studies. And now I'm at Birzeit University, where I worked on the establishment of a new faculty of art, music and design, and helped them with all the planning and thinking of how that could be a new faculty at the university. I've also done lots of different writing about different artists, Palestinian artists like Jamal Aboud, Slimane Mansour, different kind of texts here and there. And I most recently curated an exhibition called Intimate Terrains at the Palestinian Museum, which looked at this question of the representation of landscape. So that's a little bit about me. Of what I've been up to, and now at the moment I'm head of the visual art program at Birzeit University, and I'm really excited to be part of this program and to be, speaking to you all today and having two tutorials.
I was going to ask you maybe to give a little bit hints about the Palestinian scene at the moment for the ones who are not really familiar with the Palestinian scene or with the Middle Eastern scene.
If we consider questions around Palestinian art, maybe one of the first things that we have to realize is that it is made in lots of different locations. When we think about Palestinian art, we need to think that it's a community that is dispersed in many different locations because of the circumstances of history. So we can't say that that Palestinian art starts from a particular point, from a particular one location. We have Palestinian artists in diaspora. We have Palestinian artists living under occupation in East Jerusalem. We have Palestinian artists living inside Israel. We have them in Gaza Strip. We have them in diaspora. So there are many, many different points of annunciation from which Palestinian art begins. So it's really important for us to recognize that from the outset, rather than trying to confine it in a particular frame. It's more important to open it out and understand it, that it comes from many different starting points. Considering that as well, Palestinian art specifically in the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem grew up in the context of being art under occupation. So there were strictures on, for example, using the colors of the Palestinian flag, such as green, white, black, and red. There was exhibitions that were, I'm talking about during the years of occupation specifically. There were constrictions on artists being able to exhibit. You needed to have permission from the military authorities in order to hold an exhibition. There were no main galleries, museums, institutions, or let's say cultural centers, particularly for the arts. I'm talking about mainly in the 70s and 80s. So this all affected the context of the production of Palestinian art. It's sort of a major change in the 90s with the growth of NGO organizations and then the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, and institutions taking on board my ideas of creating exhibitions and residencies, thematic exhibitions, and so forth. And a lot of that support for these institutions, they were non-governmental organizations, so they had international funding for their work. So they became an important and pivotal player in the cultural scene. At the same time, there was more international recognition for Palestinian artists, particularly after the first Intifada. That would be the late 1980s, early 1990s. If before that, if you try and look for any articles about Palestinian art, particularly written in English, you wouldn't find that many. It wasn't being really studied. People thought that art being produced here was kind of a leftover of maybe, was focused on specifically on Islamic art practices. The idea that there was a contemporary art practice, it wasn't really visible, let's say, to an international scene, and it wasn't particularly studied academically. I remember when I first began doing my research, I found it very, very hard to find any texts that were written about Palestinian art in English. There were some, but not that many. And I had to do my research by actually meeting Palestinian artists and doing a lot of personal interviews with them in order to put together ideas around, the history of the development of Palestinian art. So then, with the changes, so Palestinian art became more, let's say the focus from the international world came more prominent towards Palestinian art, because prior to that, a lot of exhibitions were always held in solidarity with Palestinian artists. It was always under that guise that there would be, let's say, particularly exhibitions around the world, or in around the world, or in the Arab world as well. It was mainly under the theme of solidarity, so they weren't particularly curated around particular themes or the type of work that artists were doing. And this is something that Palestinian artists have continued to face as a challenge, is that they are always framed in terms of their identity. Even to today. I mean, it takes on different forms, but they're often. I mean, it was a case that they're selected because of their identity rather than because of the content of their work. So there were a lot of exhibitions that were curated in solidarity, and then. What picks up is a particular interest in the region, in the Middle East, to become part of international exhibitions, biennales, residencies, and so forth. And so, what you find happening, I would say, from the mid 2000, I mean, from kind of 2005 onwards, is what I call a curatorial trail that comes to this region, and you get artists being picked up for participation in international events, and what you see there then is a very particular shift in that. A particular value system around artistic practice also shifts. So your recognition becomes, and this has also happened in other places around the world, that your recognition comes through your international participation. So that very much affects the local context, whereas previously it was how much you were engaged with the community, how much you were kind of affiliated to political parties, how much you were really kind of, on the ground, or representing issues that were related to the struggle. It really then shifts to your profile being your international participations, your prizes, and so forth. The 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 problematics around that are that the selection process that takes place, it was, from what I experienced firsthand, was very opaque. Curators would come to Palestine, particularly when I was at the International Academy of Art. It became like this stopping point. So curators would come. They would often say, "Oh, could we see your best artists?" And I was, "Excuse me, what do you mean by that? How do you define that?" And so, and even many of the times they wouldn't even say that. They were looking for something, but they wouldn't make public what that is, what they were looking for, and they would. And they would pick and choose artists. I mean, they would, some of the time, or quite a lot of the time, they wouldn't often do any studio visits. They would. I say it reminded me of a doctor's surgery, because artists would come in and out of a particular room. They would often ask for rooms in the academy to work in, and so they would come in and out of the room, and every artist would be holding their laptops in order to, show their work. And these curators were always on very tight schedules, so they wouldn't often spend more than a day or so here. So it kind of set up a particular pattern, and what you saw there was that all the Palestinian artists who were invited to see these curators were all being lumped together. The selection of them was based on the fact they were Palestinian, not on their practice, not on how many years they had been practicing or the issues they were dealing with. It was all kind of lumped together, and that's why you often can see a disparity in the selection of artists. And then in that as well, you have you're putting all these artists into one basket. The artists also are very unaware of the criteria by which they are being selected for exhibitions, or opportunities. But then they become savvy and and understand what the curators are looking for, so that, and also started affecting the type of work that was being produced, and what, you know. The other point to also consider with this is, it goes back to my starting point, that Palestinian art is created in lots of different locations, is that somehow, let's say, the West Bank and Jerusalem was kind of seen as this site of authenticity, you know, that you would come and find this original Palestinian artist here, the curator would discover them, you know, and it became to the point that it, you know, someone said to me, it became quite formulaic, that you would take a very established Palestinian artist who might be working in the diaspora, and you would put them in an exhibition next to a newly discovered artist, from the West Bank in Jerusalem in particular. Even somehow, I would say Gaza was kind of, you know, became more and more invisible in this curatorial trail. So, and I think a lot of these issues still persist, and artists are finding that, you know, they have that small window of opportunity to be on the, let's say, on the international stage, and on that disappears, and they disappear. But I don't think it's specifically only tied to Palestine. I think this is now what we're seeing across many locations, is that you have this kind of small window, and that this idea that you always need to be discovering new artists, and having them in shows is what we have. What we have currently happening with the funding issues is a lot of these small organizations, which I mentioned previously, they're now struggling because of issues around funding, and all their work was based on that. So the institutions and organizations that are able to survive are those that have major support, and we have two major institutions here, which is the Abu Mohsen Khattam Foundation and the Palestinian Museum, and they are able to sustain because they have you know, their funding sources, whereas smaller organizations like the Sakakini Renad is, you know, one of our partners in this project. You know, they have a much harder time because they're a smaller organization. Their funding constantly comes from funding applications and everything. So the landscape of Palestinian cultural institutions is changing, or will be changing, because of these aspects of funding, and particular also with the way the COVID crisis has affected that. So that's a small nutshell about.
Thank you so much. I think it was a very good introduction, also to those two.
You got me. You got me off guard, Basak. I was trying to kind of cover it. I think maybe one of the points is that Palestinian arts after the, I mean, during the 70s, it was kind of very focused on poster art and relation in politics, and that's what dominated it. But then artists, you know, move into a lot more experimentation. They become, you know, looking for lots of different forms about how to express themselves. They could become more in kind of dialogue with internet, you know, with world trends that are going on in the art. And so, you know, we definitely have different generations of artists in Palestinian art. I also want to say, I think I might have been a little bit too ambitious with giving you these two texts. I'm sorry they're so long. And actually thinking of the time scale, I don't know if we could actually get through them all. I think I was a little bit over ambitious. And you know, from this last year of experiencing and doing so much on Zoom, I would be really interested, as I said, much more in having a conversation with you about these texts. I don't particularly want to lecture you about them. I'd much rather, I'm really interested to see what you picked up from them, what you found interesting, what you found relevant to your practice. Jean Fisher it's a much older text that she has there from 2007. that she wrote for the catalogue of the Johannesburg Biennale. And I found that, several times, I always keep going back to this text and I keep rereading it. And, there's always something there that I find particularly relevant. So I was kind of really interested to see what impression it made on you, and the ideas that it might have sparked with you. And 24/7 by uh, Jonathan Crary, has also a lot of ideas that I think touches on our contemporary experience. Um, and I mean, there's a lot in that book. There's only, I think, we definitely can't get through it all. I think there are some aspects that we can discuss and about it. But I think I'm also quite eclectic in the way in which I put texts together, or the way in which I try and tie things together. I mean, we might not um, right away kind of see a connection between the two, but for me, they were quite influential texts that I come back to myself and reflect on, and I wanted to share them with you. I wanted relating to what I was saying about Palestinian art, I find Jean Fisher's text, and I want to start with Jean Fisher's text. Let's talk about that first, and see what your impressions about that, what ideas you have, and then we'll see how the time goes with us, and then we'll look at Jonathan Crary's. So I don't want to bore you with having to look at text, but it just gives me some pointers to look at this. So now she has a range of ideas in this text that I still find that, although it was written really now 14 years ago, that still resonates. I mean, one of the things she was saying is that here she's talking about this idea, in relation to the influence of mass media and technologies. She begins to kind of flesh this out in this text, where she's saying the influence of mass media in the Western world is evidence enough that art is not the means by which contemporary society at large represents itself, placing the question of art's social role and even its relevance. I was particularly interested in her idea that it's not the way in which we're representing ourselves. And her other point across on the other side of the page: at present, art cannot compete with either the resources or the means of distribution of information and technology. This idea that there is no way in which art can compete with the huge corporations in media, the way in which advertising is working, and these forms. And I find it very interesting that she poses that challenge and that complexity to us, and how she also talks about further on in the text the way in which she kind of perceives that there would become a homogenized global culture through the presence of multinationals. I mean, she's kind of predicting this before this happens. So I wonder if that struck a chord with you, if you had any kind of ideas of, I mean, if you had any thoughts around those ideas that she was suggesting. Well, I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up on particular quotes, and then I'd like to to discuss them with you.
That art cannot compete with this multinational global money fabrics, I can say, is clear. It was, I think it's all clear to us. So, but then my thought about that was, it doesn't have to. So, because art is a force for sure, but it's a minor force. So that's what I think. And it's not only a force, but it's a way of living. For me, is important, and I think generally the doing of art, the living with it. So because it produces meaning for me, so, or for others. So I like the text very much, by the way. And I like the phrase the world, the West and the rest very much, because this is what we are living in.
Um, no. Why does it have to compete? That it is another way of being, and as you said, the making side of it, and actually the living side of it is that what's really key. I mean, I think personally it's something that inhabits you, that becomes part of your whole way of living.
Yeah.
It's not something that's kind of like a profession that is outside of yourself, that it
Yeah.
is very much, I mean, but that's, that's my personal view on art. I think
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has any comments around this idea of hers.
I would continue with what Bengu said, because exactly what John Fisher pointed out there is also something I think sometimes, and I think the question is not so much is it like this or not, like that there's corporations who have great impact on the imagery that circulates the world. I think it's rather like how we deal with it. And I find myself sometimes with being a bit depressed with this, and but I think it's rather about, and that's what also Bengu said, like rather using art as some kind of form of resistance, or as some form of, there's already so much imagery, so we can't like change this in the total, but at least we can like put little things out there that question this and go against this. So I also found this quote particularly interesting because of this, of like seeing in how we deal with the situation, and either going with a depressed way or being with like, okay, maybe we should empower ourselves by doing our art.
Yes. No, I think your point, and I think um, it's quite as you said, it's quite easy to kind of get depressed by this and kind of feel that the huge challenge that one's facing, being in this kind of having a practice that's kind of in a minority, or that's, I don't know, inhabits you and isn't the way in which such a large majority of people are working and functioning. But as you said, to kind of create it as a space of critique and a way of kind of thinking through this incredible volume of the visual that is being produced in our times at the moment. I mean, I was reading kind of statistics of like how many hours per minute are being uploaded onto YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all these forms of the visual that are, that the majority of people are engaging with and using all the time, a lot more than going to exhibitions or seeing exhibitions online or whatever. And that kind of to realize our position in relation to that, and how we engage with this overwhelming amount of visual noise, if we want to categorize it as that, or this production of the visual, and where we situate ourselves in relation to that. I also find it was quite interesting that she said that this also engages with the question of memory, because she says here, we are told not only who we are, but who we must remember having been. And I found that kind of interesting to reflect on, that it's also this homogenization of global cultures, the rise in nationalism again kind of engages with that too in these different forms. And I wonder if you had any particular thoughts on that as well. As you say, we're not only told, we are told not only who we are, but who we must remember having been.
I just want to say one sentence to remember who we have been. So they are making the history, and they are writing also the general history and the individual ones. If you have control over the past too, then you can write the narrative from there on. So that is what I told. So.
Yeah.
I think what is very interesting for me here is the way she's describing memory, but also the way she's describing this comparative viewpoint is so much connected with the perception, because how the artists are designing the perception, the power of art should be coming from this point of view, how we can change the perception of the society about some urgent issues through art, or how we can cope with life through art. So I think art has its powers in different locations and in different moments.
I can relate to what you're saying, Basak, and actually when we were discussing this previous quote, I can also relate to what the others have said, but I was thinking, isn't also her point that, yes, maybe the people who, let's say, dare to call themselves an artist might find a way to cope with these things and to kind of stay in the moment, or I don't know. But the question is also how, and I think that's what she was saying also, how can this compete in the terms of being perceived by people who might not call themselves artists or do not find a way to maybe deal with these massive amounts of information. So I think that's also part of the question, like what is the role of whom, or how can you even call, like how much about it is to feel to have access to call yourself an artist or to act like an artist, if we define it as this material in the moment, as it was described above.
When you were speaking, you made me think about a particular change in context that happened here in Palestine. Was that when art was showing a lot more of, let's say, a national vocabulary in terms of particular kind of imagery that was about the struggle or about resistance or about particular national identity, and there became a vocabulary of this in the types of symbols that artists would be using in their work, that let's say a general public engaged with art here in a much wider context, or a lot more people were engaging with art. This is how the narratives of, let's say, an older generation have spoken about art, in that exhibitions were held in schools, they were held in local community centers. It was based on showing people their identity. So we had a lot of imagery that would you would see the Palestinian woman in traditional dress, you would see people working on the land, you would see images of the flag or the key, which is tied to the homes that were lost in the Nakba. And so that they said that the audience, there was a much larger audience for these types of exhibition. And then when art moved a lot more into experimentation, and for dealing with questions, a whole range of different questions around identity, history, memory, so forth. I'm being quite general here. That and used more contemporary forms of representations, such as installation and performance and so forth, that the audience began to drift away and felt that they couldn't read or understand these particular works. So your point kind of made me think about that division, and this division has became, in recent years has become quite stark in the Palestinian context, that the everyday person doesn't think that going to an exhibition is relevant to them. So yeah, this question of a whole sense of being, it's looking for that. I think too. There's a I'm really drawn to her quote at the end of the text. I'm going to jump around a bit, but she says, "Art does not transmit information. It's not concerned with representation of the indexical real or the efficient communication of the sort endorsed by mass technology. The reality it presents bears no direct relation with any natural referent, and it is not readably decodable system of science, such as photo reportage or a television soap opera. On the contrary, it's a critical mode. It works to uncouple the habitual relationship between meaning and referent, exposing rather the bathos of an essential incommunicability between self and other. The success of systematic visual codes is they can function efficiently at a distance from their source, and they are readily reproducible. Art, by contrast, up until now, and we await the effects of the internet, I think that she was writing this quite some time ago, has demanded a more intimate, a bodily engagement with the viewer, less concerned with perception than with reminiscence. Vision here is haptic, it's a sense of touch, and it implicates other sensory mechanisms, sound, smell, rhythm, spatiality, and so forth. An aesthetic dimension that is not reproducible, not fixed, and asks for attentiveness from the viewer. By contrast, the disembodiment of telecommunications, art re-embodies the viewing subject. It does not attempt to tell us who we are, but rather asks, who are you and where do you stand? I mean, I often come back to this quote, the way in which she talks as vision here being haptic, that vision is a sense of touch, and the way art causes us to reminisce, and the way in which it's not about telling us who we are, but is rather posing questions to us. I find those relation to the senses, a very interesting way of her describing this. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Particularly this idea that it's a haptic experience, that it's not something that's, that it's about reminiscing, that it's not, and that it's about an embodied experience. I know, of course, a lot of this has changed. We're all sitting here via Zoom. So there is this different in this relation to this embodiment that she's speaking about. And as I said, she wrote it quite some time ago. But I wonder if your thoughts about this idea that vision is haptic, that it's a sense of touch.
I would like to ask it to Sophia as well, because I think it's so much related to what she's working on at the moment.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it's interesting, like when she talks about it being haptic, and like a sense of touch, but it could also be like being touched, not on the skin level, but in some emotional way. So maybe like that is one way to translate it into like today's how we experience things today. And like, for example, I saw a short video, a short film yesterday, art film that like really touched me, and it was old, and I saw it on my small screen, like not even on the big one. And I mean, it does something to the room, like how you see it. And I guess that Jean Fisher is like more talking about like physical rooms where you embody this and haptic in that way. But I mean, I think it's possible just to translate it in that sense.
May I add to this, Sophia? I think it's a really great point, that the being touched, and I actually have the feeling that this being touched is the same as touch, or at least is what I interpret is trying to say, that it kind of grounds you in where you are and in your body, so it makes you aware of, even through Zoom and even through conversations like these. I think I can at least say this happens often, that it kind of it has a really strong physical effect if I maybe mentally feel related to something, or if I somehow consciously feel this is going somewhere. I really feel it in my body, and I feel that this is what she also says. Yeah, to me at least, it would be the goal of art, or like whether it's visual or audible or anyway, to apply to all the senses in some way, or to draw on all the senses.
Can I continue a little bit? I think it's interesting also. I think for a long time we were focused on the room and the exhibition space, but I think maybe just like this year, I've seen like many art shows from the museums. You know, when everything closed, they really fast tried to fix it. You know,
Yes.
with the Instagram live shows, and in my opinion, it's been like kind of bad because it's not made that way. Like you don't get, you get something else. But I think maybe this year also, like, well, for me, definitely, lit this interest in me. And how do you do it if you from the starting point wants to do it accessible through a laptop or through a phone or whatever way you do, or like with AR, like in the city and those kinds of installations. So I think it's a different thing, but I think it will be so much fun to see what will happen in the production of art that this year has done to it.
No, absolutely. I think this idea of your idea of being touched as well, as you said, where just aside from being a physical, but then also emotional, and also in terms of the volume of the visual that we get. So then, what does touch us, and what does affect us? And yes, I think the experience of this last year and a half or so is going to affect. And I'm with you on a lot of. I mean, there were so many different types of exhibitions that were kind of, as you said, immediately kind of put online, and you had to kind of navigate them through using your mouse or your pad, and they tried to kind of find all these different ways of simulating those experiences.
Apart from the object or installation-based art, I'm also thinking about what is happening with the performance. Because we have all artists here, some of them are doing really performative works or performances, and we are talking about human interaction, we are talking about the moment. So maybe, Nandomiso, can you shoot? Can you tell us what you think?
Thank you, Basak.
Hi. So I'll just pick up on this idea of the haptic, and my current interest is in being able to create a performance experience through video performance. So I am, yeah. For me, it just sparked some mind mapping really about the ways in which the visual can really be an experience of touch and an experience of also really I kind of went to and maybe also actually like the idea of of presence, and maybe bouncing back between this text and the other text, which I found more generative for me, because this one also made me cringe at parts. But really interested in then the ways in which I could use this idea of the image as haptic to be able to create a sensory experience, and an experience that calls up sound and smell, and also then for me very specifically in terms of thinking as a performance artist, presence, and this notion of the aesthetic experience and how the person on the other side of a screen, who I may or may not see, depending on the kind of whether it's a live video or it's a recorded video that I work with, that I'm looking at calling the attention of the other person on the other side and looking at our relation um, through this medium. So whereas in performance, our relation is there and I'm working with our presence and I'm working with this feedback loop of what's happening between your presence and my presence. And so I'm in the space of our smells and all of those things, the experiences that you've had coming to the space, in the space, if it's site specific, if it's not. And so I'm also very interested in what I manifest with kind of a site specific video performance that really does kind of place us and bring us to the attention of what is in the site, what is taking place, and how where you are sitting on the other side of the screen brings you to this moment and really brings us in relation and not just you consuming whatever you're seeing as just a visual image. So I found that as something that was interesting for me, and then really kind of drawing towards the second reading, which gave me less cringe moments.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think even also related to that is this question of taking time as well. You know, with the pace and this relates, you know, to the next text by Jonathan Crary. This idea that, you know, engaging in a performance or engaging with the part takes a different temporality than the kind of temporality that we are so caught up with. Well, a lot of us in the kind of in our daily lives, and that sense of taking time and that sense of kind of also being aware of our senses, I think is also something to consider, because it, as you were kind of mentioning about the cinema, that experience of going to a cinema or going into an exhibition or the performances, that taking that time to go into another space, you know, and the temporality of that type of space, because kind of what Jonathan Crary is suggesting and what kind of Jean Fisher touches on in a few places here is this idea of this continual consumption and this kind of speed at which we're continually having to consume and produce and be you know, even in a way, a lot of kind of platforms are set up like, you know, TikTok and so forth. It's this kind of all these, let's say, sound bites or small kind of videos. I mean, the question around the time spent with works is also that it's something that draws attention. This of being at a different pace than what we are kind of becoming more and more conditioned to be to be part of. I don't know if my idea is getting across to you, but that kind of sense of you know, I even think about it when I've gone to large scale exhibitions like biennales, and I often wonder, well, what are they trying to kind of set up in the level of consumption that are in these huge exhibitions? Because, you know, a lot of the times is that you know, they're very, very large scale exhibitions, and you're you know, supposedly you go there for a day or two, or not even, and you see an incredible amount of works, and there are performances and videos, and you can't really consume all of that. You know, the works have been taken so much time to be made, and they ask for the time for reflection, the time to be with those works. But the setup that there is in the biennale doesn't necessarily allow you for that. You go through in this kind of speed things, and maybe Basak can speak to that a lot. But there's this kind of, that you have to consume all these all these works, and actually, the works themselves require a lot more kind of time and presence and being with them in all the different forms that the works are in. But that is not really being set up in a lot of circumstances, unless you have, I would say, and I would call it a privilege to be able to go back, to go back and see something more than once or spend time with it, which often isn't the case.
I want to add something to that. You reminded me of Sarat Maharaj in a way. I remember in 2002 when Okvi and Zabur opened the documenta, it was a big discussion because there were so many video works or screen-based works. Some people were questioning, how are we going to consume? Then Sarat Maharaj replied to that, saying that, like, we would like the audience to be responsible about their navigation. He didn't say in this exact words, but I liked it very much, that this responsibility and the consciousness of the audience, how you can challenge your audience and how you can come to another level with them to experience something else and to give them the responsibility what to choose, what to consume or what not to consume. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm stuck in the idea of touch and you moved on quickly. But maybe I say a bit about that and then move to the other, because Tina, like I was thinking when we were talking about touch and haptic, not only in the form, but I was thinking about it in the content. And in the previous quote of like memory, or we have to remember who we were, and in relation to the region or Palestine. And what I've been thinking the last few years, or I'm trying to do, is how to touch a memory, or how to take a memory or out of a monumental feeling or state. Because when a memory, or when our history becomes monumental, it feels like we cannot touch it, it's just there. And this produces all this colonial infrastructure that is already, in the production of the way things work, even in she was talking, the text talks about this West and others, and the recognition of other, how it just emphasizes the cultural difference rather than really focusing on the content itself. So for me, I was thinking about touching the content or the memory, and how this can be a kind of interactive or activist way of producing works. Because thinking now to the other point about these big exhibitions and biennials, and it's the same point of who gets there and why it's there, and most of them are in the West, or and who gets to show there from here. Let's say it's all connected in my head. But to talk about what Pasak was saying, this reminded me when I worked in Documenta 13. So I was there for 4 months working with the curatorial team as an assistant. But the funny part that I spent 4 months, but I tell you now, I could not see all the works. I was there like all the time, but no way, like really, because I was working, but after I would just sneak out to see like William Kintridge piece, and it's a huge piece, and I put all my energy there, and then I'm done, because it just, for me, it's about, I try as a viewer to really put the energy, like let it consume me, or like it's a both way relation of consumption where it consumes me and I consume it. And if I try to go to consume others, then it gets out. So how do we again deal with time in a different way, as Jonathan Crary is saying, because his whole book is about this time. And I don't know if it makes sense, but
no, you do. You reminded me of that, really, of that sense of of two kind of often feelings in the kind of large exhibitions. That this kind of feeling that, um, yeah, that the one that you want to give that you don't have enough time, that you don't have enough time to spend with the artworks, and that you want to, and there's a sense, and there's always a sense that you've missed something as well, you know, that there's something that you didn't see, the you know that you lost, and that you didn't experience. And then also on another side, often that you know, a sense of um, visual exhaustion that you actually cannot take in, and you cannot, you know, that you need to become completely immersed in the work, and that there isn't enough time for that, or space for that. So yeah, you made me think about that. I can, you know, so yeah, that is a side to that. But then what Basak was saying, that then it becomes the responsibility of the audience to kind of make those decisions about what they spend time with. Yeah, and then the question, what helps us with that decision making process.
But I really think that they should be guided and navigated.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Then I
Approaches.
wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, and then when we talk, I know we've shifted into these kind of big exhibitions, but you know, it's also then it becomes like, well, you know, even you know, what guides you into, like, it's someone said, oh, you know, you really should go and see that pavilion. Oh, you know, okay, I know the work of that curator. I really want to see what they're doing, and it's like how you get guided into what you see and what you miss.
I want to ask one question to Kim, because I also think that we came to a point, I think with the Octopus program, we'll be also experimenting it and experiencing it a lot to exhibit in different cultural contexts, and how we should be translating the work to the other context, or how the work itself should be translated. The lens of the text that we've been reading, I want to have her reflections, especially from the these different cultural points of view.
Sure. I think in reading this text, I share Namjoon sentiments around the cringiness in terms of some of the text, and kind of what was taken for granted in the text, and kinds of the trickiness in terms of what how we approach things, or what a praxis is, or what an orientation is. So I think some of the text kind of took for granted in terms of like just talking about art, and like you know,
her word in particular, like what's proper to art, I find like what.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot. There is terminology that seems really kind of in another
yeah,
space.
and even the section right above it, you know, as if people are just borrowing methodologies and practices. I think that even the naming of what those methodologies and practices are incredibly European, in that, you know, we can name Picasso's whatever he's doing as like just doodling with like quote unquote African methodologies, and then whatever the European thing is has a pretty proper name and a very identifiable lineage. But I mean, I think
there's a lot
for
that's
me,
being done to uncouple all that kind of writing now, or way that those histories have been written. I think a lot of people are working on looking at modernities across the world, and how you know, those narratives need to be decolonized.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
It's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I can see some of the influence of Stuart Hall in her work, and I think some of the maybe misreadings, or the kind of taking for grantedness of it. But like for me and the work that I do, like I come from I come from a Black American background. I'm from the US, and I've been living in South Africa for 3 years now. And so the work that I do tries to find the overlaps in terms of like our experiences, and obviously the stark differences, particularly when it comes to asymmetrical power differences and access to and proximity to empire, but kind of what are you know what is the the kind of trajectory that we've come from. What are the different kinds of ways that we've carved out our own methodologies, and how do we kind of negotiate that when it gets to a certain kind of level of visibility? I mean, I think it's kind of always an interesting question to think about how art, engages with capitalism very obviously, and how some of us, like how we negotiate these ideas of like selling out, and how we negotiate these ideas of what becomes too public in some ways. So yeah, I mean, I found parts of this to be quite useful, particularly how she phrases how like art can actually untangle what we think kind of normative relations are between meanings, images, and discourse. I think that that's a really useful way. I think that some of like the best kinds of iterations of art is when it actually flips, for lack of a better word, flips things on its head, but also demonstrates what certain things actually mean, and what does it mean when you change those things. I think those are some of my reflections.
Yeah, so as a number of you were saying that you kind of found more inspiration in this text, or more points, maybe we can begin to open up about this. I mean, I think Jonathan Crary has some really interesting ideas around this idea of what I found interesting about this text was this idea that we can go without sleep and still be efficient. So it's not a case of just being awake, of just trying to stimulate wakefulness, but that we could also be efficient and productive. And the way in which he goes from that, this idea that we can be continually productive, continual consumption, continual productivity without a break. He's also talking how kind of the development of the idea of the sleepless soldier would then become this idea of the sleepless worker, the sleepless consumer, and how that kind of research and development would cross over into or let's say military research would cross over into our daily lives. I thought too his ideas around the way in which sleep becomes an affront to capitalism. The time in which you're sleeping and you're regenerating, is this time in which you're not online, you're not connected to networks, you're not consuming, you're not producing, and the way in which nothing can be extracted from you, and nothing can be harnessed from you when you're sleeping. And at the same time, he was also talking about, he's looking at the numbers of hours that people across at different times in history, and how the amount of time that we sleep is getting less and less, and the way in which sleep is seen is increasingly becoming something that is derogatory. So in a sense, he was also looking in parts at this. I know I'm running through quite a few ideas quite quickly. This idea that how we put our equipment into sleep mode. This I found was really how he talks about that it's a kind of that it's not functioning, it's not it's not at its optimum, it's in sleep mode. And the way we do that with all our types of equipment, the way in which sleep is associated on the other side with awakening, so that awakenings in religion, awakenings in political discourses, this idea that awakening from ideologies, so that the way in which sleep is constantly in this kind of derogatory position, I found was really interesting in his ideas. The way in which he was also speaking about sleep in relation to security, and that who can sleep, and who is keeping us safe, and that we can only sleep if we have this sense of security, and the way in which incredible tragedies happen when people are asleep. I mean, he brings the reference of the disaster in Bhopal, but then also this idea of who guards us and who keeps us safe, and the whole way in which our homes and our cities are constructed in relation to this question of being safe while you're asleep, and the way in which we can also relate that in relation to so many wars, that raids are often taken at night, that kind of happens in those kind of structures. The night raids are something that were for example, here in Palestine, it's when they come into into people's houses. It's when they come in and search people's homes, take over areas, and so forth. So that also really kind of resonated with me. And also in relation to that, his at the beginning of the book, when they're talking about the idea of illuminating the planet 24/7, this idea that we would have continuous illumination, and the idea what that would do to our metabolism, and what that would do to the biodiversity on the planet, and what would happen to our forms. On the one side, the argument being that, okay, if we were able to be 24/7, we would have so much more time to do everything, but would we have all that more time to do everything? And he also mentions that this question of we never being switched off. We're always tuned into particular apparatus. We're shopping, we're gaming, we're texting, we're downloading, we're engaging. There is where are the moments when we're not consuming? So he has a whole range of ideas around this 24/7, and I'd really like to hear your kind of impressions, or was there were particular parts of the text that you found resonant with your work or your ideas? I can come back to particular points, but I'd much rather hear from you. So,
well, yeah,
jump in. Yeah, please.
Well, I'm really happy to know this book because it's the first time that I see it. I didn't know it before. It was really interesting for me to read it. It was a short time, but I tried to read across. I read all the chapter 1 and a little bit from chapter 2, and I really liked the experiences done on the birds, all the experiences with the mirrors, the experiences done on the Kahatini, because I didn't know about it, and all the Pentagon missions. And it's really, I was really shocked because I didn't know all those arguments or testimonies about all those people. And it's really, how to say it, I was really knocked by the idea of the superhuman, or the I don't know, the Übermensch maybe, and how can the human wants to be had another extension of it, and maybe to go on um, beyond life or something like that, and be more efficient. But it's not about efficiency, it's about uh, maybe taking a rest and to go on another cycle. And I really liked the notion when he said the iconography of dawn and sunrise. I was really hidden by this because it was really visual for me, and it was like really an analogy about my process, because I was really into the world of dreams. I was diving into the world of dreams to make all the iconographies of it, because it's really an important thing for me to go to sleep anyway, and to take other forms of it. And I was really knocked by these ideas, and the average time that we take to sleep, and how can be productive in sleeping, and take all those notions from dreams, and how the society kind of want us not to go there, and be really in this kind of reality, and not go on other kinds of realities. And I like it when he said in chapter 2, a human needs are always mutable and expendable. And I find like it's maybe it's a kind of project on humans, and how he can and how society can extract more and more about us, and how can society um, provide us with new needs to make us consume more. And I always didn't like this idea, because I had a master degree in product design, and I left this word because of this idea, because one day I was hit by the idea of how to create a new need for humans, to create new products for it, because uh, there's always something new, and there's always new products to consume anyway. And another thing, because I was really submerged by this book, and I tried to discuss it with friends those couple of days. And a friend of mine said something that about there's a friend of us who was captured in a riot, and has several questionnaires. I don't know how to say it in English. And he was trying to take a nap in the interrogatoire. I don't know in yeah. And he was trying to take a nap, and he was pretending to cry, and he was putting his hands on his face to just to take a nap, and he was pretending to cry, and to be in despair. And he was trying to take a 5 minutes of nap or 2 minutes of nap, and he was pretending to not to respond, because he was in despair, and he was making his hand like this, and he was just taking a rest, because he was so overwhelmed by questions and all those hours of arresting. And I was really shocked, because I didn't know um, that all he needs is sleep. Obviously, and he didn't know, he didn't want to drink, he didn't want to eat, he just needed to take a rest, and that's it. Voila.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much for this book.
Thank you.
It was really interesting,
Thank you.
because I didn't take because I'm continuing to read it, because it
Yeah,
was a
no,
really short
I
time.
know it,
Yeah,
it's a lot.
yeah,
I mean, you can get so engrossed in the first two chapters. I mean, I went
yeah,
over them again. There are so many points, and you also bring up that point about, exhaustion. That sense of of exhaustion, and as you were speaking about this person, of just needing the space to be able to and this time to be able to rest. And even if we look at, you know. The world around us, you can see, just in our daily lives, you can see people kind of nodding off. People will be, they'll be very frank. You can see, students in lectures, they'll be, they'll be falling asleep, maybe from boredom, um, but or people falling, asleep just sitting on the bus commuting or something, and that the body's need for this, and the fact that we have, my impression is that we have less space and time for this, and we're being required to be at such a high level of efficiency and productivity, and how much negativity there is about taking time and space and not being productive, and so forth. Because I want to hear from you. I can keep going on about his his ideas.
Can I quickly jump in?
Yeah,
Also, that it fits to what you just said, or it reminded me of what you just said, Boshka, and also what you how you introduced the text before, Tina, with the and that's a point that I found really like thrilling in the text, that when he speaks about that we kind of know or consider sleep as something instinctive, so to say. Also in connection to talking about going back a bit in the history of sleep, so to say, and how the less and less we sleep over the centuries, so to say, but that he also said in the same breath, so to say, that it is can also be described as something that we learned, or something that kind of that we learned through imitation and education. I think that was really interesting. And that is kind of, I think that could be a tool, or I took it as a tool in that sense, that one can almost like a tool for protest, like turning that back, and like
yes, we could do a massive sleep
protest or something. No, but
we
and
could
also,
do a massive sleep in, wouldn't it be fantastic?
But also, and you mentioned that before, I think this that this linguistic figure that he also discusses, the sleep mode, I think was a super interesting one, as like, and also one of the points where I kind of found myself kind of not caught, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing this too. Like, I'm totally trusting this sleep mode, so to say. And in the end, it's like, yeah, it just tells you once again that the sleep you're having within this time frame of that the sleep mode is on is basically just saying that it's that nothing is ever fundamentally off. So not even that is an actual state of rest, so to say.
Yes.
And
I think it also, it was also interesting how he was mentioning how many people kind of wake up in the middle of their sleep, and the first thing they will do is they will check their messages, they will check their Facebook, they will check and I think we've all done that. We all have that. The first thing we do, the minute we open our eyes, we just completely grab, everybody has their phones in such close proximity to their sleeping space. It's just, or that kind of also sense of anxiety that we're late, that we've missed something, that something's happened, is also kind of there in the background of our sleep, and he just picks up on that so articulately.
Absolutely. And perhaps one other thing I just wanted to say that I found really interesting in the text also was when he's speaking about that the vacuity of the catchphrase 24/7 in comparison to if we would say 24, 30, 365, so say that this wouldn't work. And I think that's a brilliant sentence actually, when he says to say 24/365, for example, is simply not the same, for this introduces an unwieldy suggestion of an extended temporality in which something might actually change, in which unforeseen events might happen. I think that was really a brilliant thought, that there's, that's...
I think too, he also, this idea of 24/7 is also kind of set up in such a way that you are like expected to perform to it. Like there's something, if you're not able to perform 24/7, if you're not able to be there, there's a default in yourself that you're not able to be this kind of, this, this manager, or particular in particular positions, that why can't you be 24/7, why can't you go that whole leg, to submit your reports, to do your whatever profession you're in. But I think there's also the way in which it reflects on us negatively, that okay, well, you're not up to it, you can't actually keep pace. And I found it really interesting the way in which he spoke of the amount of different kind of pharmaceuticals that people were taking, from antidepressants to bipolar issues to hyperactiveness, and how also painkillers, how so many of us are kind of always reaching out. It's become a norm for people to reach out to these kind of chemicals now, in order to be fit for the systems that we're supposed to be productive in.
And I think that would also went well hand in hand with like when you drop this like example of the bottled water, for example, as like a commodification of like kind of human needs, and that's the same, of course, for the sleep that we are kind of used to buy sleep products, so to say, or like, or
Right.
not actually, but like there's a market, so to say. It's yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, when you think about it on both sides, we've got the products that are that are there to keep us awake all the time, and the products that are there to help us sleep. On both sides, it's quite phenomenal, and its consumption at all different levels is becoming like my impression is becoming a norm. If you speak to students that are taking exams or forever, it's just like, okay, they will be taking stimulants to be able to keep them in this kind of state that will enable them to be yeah, please. Someone else has a comment. Noor?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, but I always, I mean, for me, this idea of sleep is, of course, very much connected to the class issue and who gets to sleep and who doesn't. And I feel here we're working about middle workers, like the middle class and below. And it's really important because this reminded me of the book Nights of Labor for Rancière, which he wrote from a different perspective in terms of the Marxist perspective about always like this idea of alienation, or like talking about the work conditions from the factory or from the inside. Where Rancière in this book, he collected when the workers are finished of the work or what's defined work, and he collected their poetry and their other like creative work to make this book. And I'm thinking of this, I don't know where I'm going with it, but I also think of this a lot of stories we read about now where this the auto cars and people are like from Los Angeles to whatever, like sleeping inside they quote sleeping in this auto car that doesn't sleep. So how we are like who is becoming the non-human here, I don't know. Yeah, but
I think your point about this idea of privilege, of like who is privileged to be able to have the freedom to have as much sleep as they want, but doesn't have an alarm to have to be up and to be at a particular place or point or online at a particular time, and who can have that space and freedom to sleep as much as they want or when they want, particularly with your mention of kind of the labor and workers, and even that brings us into kind of the whole idea of that he mentions about the 9 to 5, which is completely disintegrated, but then the ideas of the night shifts, the ideas of the workers that are working very early in the morning to clean the cities, to clean institutions, the streets, and so forth, and all that idea that around those kind of jobs as well. So yeah, this idea of privilege in relation to sleep that you're kind of picking up on, and even people who are kind of caught in doing more than one job, and so that their sleep is completely reduced because they're doing day shifts and night shifts, and and that ability for them to, in the end they have to be able to survive with very little sleep in order to be able to survive. And then at the other side, the incredibly long hours that people are more and more in any position, in many positions, are having to work well outside the idea of 9 to 5, because it's all tied to your productivity and efficiency. So there's very little space for like, okay, I'm having a day when I'm not having a day, I'm having a week, I'm having a month when I'm not productive. It's just, it's it all comes back that there's something wrong with the individual themselves, and so then they have to seek out medication. They have to seek out. I think we're very much in that kind of mindset, and then even coming over, or maybe just kind of making a cross reference into the art world, there's a sense that also, you know, in anyone's CV, you know, you have to have exhibitions every year, you have to participate in, you have to have been, you know, you can't have like, you know, 2-3 year gaps in your CV as an artist. People will be saying like, what was that person doing, you know? So I also gotta say, oh, not just artists, I think in a lot of fields, it's like, okay, you know, it has to be this continual productivity. Go ahead.
The Octopus program is kind of criticizing it in a way. Like, this is kind of the idea, like not to force you to come up with end works or end of products, but rather how we can work together while you're having your process of producing. That's one thing. But secondly, I want to say something which is very interesting for me. When I was reading the text, it came to my mind. You know, all the computers that we are using at the moment, you have to shut them down sometimes because they have to do indexing. And this is exactly how your brain works. Basically, if you sleep less, your brain cannot do indexing, and it causes memory problems. Noor talked about privileged and also else added to that. But apart from this, there's also a very cultural, I think it's also valid for each and every cultural connotation of the sleeplessness or the speed or the progression. Correlation between slowing down and being in progress. I think that's the point where it fits so well to the artists as well, to the artist production as well. But if you go back to what Bushra was talking about and all these capitalist drives and, you know, with the market, with even the biennial system and so forth, the artists are constantly being challenged and pushed to produce new works. And there's always a very rare opportunity for the artist to digest what they have just done.
Yeah, the privilege of sleep, as Noir said, it is not only how much to sleep or if to sleep, but also when to sleep. You know, there is a term of graveyard shift. As I said, I like the book very much, and I like the text very much. And it was also, and I hated it, of course. I mean, it's horrid because with taking away the sleep for consumption, for the machine, so to work, you take away the dreams also, the dream world. So, and for example, if I would not dream and if I would not have that, half of my artistic practice would be gone away, you know, because I'm doing since 2010 dream diary, and I work with the stuff. I mean, not only I also work with the real world, and so I cannot imagine without what Başak said, this indexing. You know, we need that, and if we don't have that, we just get mentally sick. That is so clear. And now there was a nice awareness of, you know, before there was no neuroscience. There were psychology and psychiatry and all this stuff. But now we have neuroscience to temper all this, to temper the head and temper our lives. I mean, I find it very, very concerning. And when I ask some people, for example, when I ask them, do you dream? Do you remember them? Many people do not. And this is an observation I made in all these years. So thank you.
Thank you. Elise, you wanted to say something?
Yes, and I think Bengo, you gave the perfect, I think it's strongly related, and also to what Başak said before with the processing and the mental aspect of like sleeping and processing the day and everything, and also remembering dreams. And when I was reading this work, what really captured me was at some point he says, a 24/7 world is a disenchanted one in its eradication of shadows and obscurity and of alternate temporalities. And I was thinking what really struck me is also, and therefore I would like to stretch it even further, the idea that we have to remember our dreams and the emphasis we have on memory and on the mental aspect. And yesterday I was trying to fall asleep having read this, and I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly like aware of how much I couldn't sleep. I needed to sleep, and how much preference or focus I put on the mental or the part where I'm awake and where I can process things. And then I thought, because later on dreams, he also says something. Let me scroll down. Like, dreaming cannot be accommodated with conceptions of mental life based on empirical sense perception or on abstract rational thought. And I thought, why do I want to understand my dreams? Why do I want or place my ability to understand it or grasp things? And the same goes for experience, bodily experiences. Why is that the most important part for me? Can I not find a way to trust that my dreams are my dreams, and be okay with the fact that I don't remember them, and also trust that me as a body, I'm having relationships with everything around me, and that I'm communicating with everything around me, even though sometimes I'm not like consciously aware of what is happening. So I'm constantly trying to understand everything and to explain everything, but I would really like to not want that, and to trust that these things are happening regardless of my ability to understand them. And I think I'm really curious if non-Domissim can say something, because it relates also to the net ministry maybe, or at least what Kim here wrote. The nature of rest and the relationship to rest, like these things like rest and experience and dreams being something that we don't need to consciously capture. I don't know if my point comes across. It's a long story, but it's something I'm struggling with, and I think that really came through in this text as well. Do you?
Yeah, I think you know what you're. Oh, yeah, no, I think you know what you when you were speaking, what really what you made me think about was this idea as well, in which we're so, I don't know, we're so caught up in the mental that we want to remember our dreams, we want to analyze our dreams. What did our dreams mean? There's so much around that, but that we're often, not listening on to our bodies, and that there's a way in which there's also so much happening inside our bodies, but we're so kind of caught up in the let's say in the thinking and the mental, that we're also not engaging in the space of our body. And that's why we have these issues around exhaustion, and we're pushing ourselves so much, and we're something as simple as just kind of listening to one's own heartbeat or just one's own breathing. There's all these kind of, things that we just have, in so many ways, eliminated them from our daily lives. I mean, I know there's a lot of practices that are going back to that, doing that, but just as a kind of also a point, for that. I think also one of the points that struck me in the discussion too was his idea that he was talking about how it lessens the opportunity to people for decision making, that we have so many tools that are there to give less and less time to reflection and contemplation. So he had here this quote. It goes, even in the absence of any direct compulsion, we choose to do what we are told to do. We allow the management of our bodies, our ideas, our entertainment, and all our imaginary needs to be externally opposed. We buy products that have been recommended to us through monitoring of our electronic lives, and then we voluntarily leave feedback for others about what we have purchased. the compliant subject who submits to all manners of biometric surveillance and intrusion, and who ingests toxic food and water and lives near nuclear reactors without complaint. The absolute abdication of responsibility for living is indicated by the titles of many best-selling guides that tell us with a grim fatality: the 1,000 movies to see before we die, the 100 tourist destinations to visit before we die, and the 500 books to read. You know, I thought that was also, you know, this idea that we also have constant guidance. We always need these recommendations. We're always looking for reviews of everything, and the way in which there's this lessening of decision making that he talks about, I found quite interesting. But maybe there are other points in the text too that maybe you want to discuss. You know, but this idea that, I mean, I was just, you know, you open up any kind of newspaper or whatever, and it's like, okay, these are the, you know, the 10 cultural events that you should see this year. These are the 10 books that you should be looking at for 2021. This idea that, you know, this constant guidance to that. So the decisions are, you know, made for you. I doubt anybody buys a piece of equipment today without reading reviews of it to kind of know what other people have experienced. So it's what's happening also with decision making is he's also bringing that up as well.
Yeah, I really like the idea of non-compliance, and you know, so the whole idea around the NAP ministry and rest being resistance, and just not complying with what the world has said we should and have to do, and also for me this sense of creating then the space to listen, so to be able to be attuned to life and living as more than just what you can see. So also really like destabilizing that kind of like bright light life that we always trying to shine a light on everything and see everything. And I mean, it even makes me think of, so in my work, kind of, you know, like reading about like discourses around rape and how we need more light everywhere so that we can feel safer, and then the sense of like sleep as a place that we need to fight for that vulnerability, fight for the, you know, the space of not being afraid instead of putting more lights up. So also like this, like the ethics of like really becoming responsible for life itself, and what is that, and really asking us to think about what life actually is, and not just trying to live in a state of emergency and continuing to perpetuate those kinds of senses of, so we reacted this way to the state of emergency, and now this is going to be our life for forever. We just kind of adjust to that, and we forget to attune to what it is that life is, rather than these like responses and reactions to things. But I really also like the reminders of the alternate temporalities. So the space that sleep allows for us to be able to be in, to listen, because that's really core to my practice is listening, and attunement and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was interested in this, you know, the sense of how we also just kind of celebrate the hallucination of presence and not really being attentive to, you know, so this idea of, you know, art then asking us to be present, asking us to be attentive to ourselves and to listen to ourselves, and not to be attentive in the sense of like the kind of hypervigilance and needing to be awake, but to be able to be attentive to our need to sleep and to not be awake, and to tune in to the other places that are part of our existence, and to tune into trees and animals and water, and the sense of, you know, the human entity as not just this this one thing. But I wanted to also just one of the things that I really liked about that was also the spectrality of it. So in the sense of, you know, making space for ourselves to be able to hear the ghosts, right? To actually allow for that to be possible. So I really liked that. I think it was at the end of the first chapter, that it also reminds us to be, to be in tune with that. Okay, I can't find it now, but I really enjoyed that aspect.
Thank you so much. I think it's really. I'm just thinking about what you said. It's just really beautiful. Some of the, thoughts about that. When you first started off, it reminded me, and maybe all of us remember this question about whether people are able to sleep with lights on, and the way in which children often need lights in order to feel safe when they sleep. It just kind of resonated, kind of those kind of lights too when you first started speaking of it. That and that need for feeling safe, or that question of vulnerability, of how we kind of let ourselves be vulnerable in the space of sleep. That kind of it reminded me a lot of about that, and this ideas around also childhood and sleep, and the kind of rituals that we go through there of having like a night light, or having a story, or I don't know, but that or the inability to sleep, or trying to also place children into patterns of sleep. We incredible efforts to try, to organize babies into sleeping patterns, and young children into sleeping patterns when they're just accustomed to sleep when they need sleep. That just provoked, just one of the thoughts when you first started speaking, and this idea of having to, he speaks about the harshness of light and glare, and as you were saying, this idea of having to light something up and to focus it and to kind of put that on it as well, and why do we have that approach, and a sense of being in tune, of listening, and just just being in tune with everything around us. Has lessened so much. I mean, he has this point where he says we're always switched on, we're always texting, we're always downloading, we're shopping, we're gaming, we're in the sense that also he mentioned the way that it sets up this sense that that we want to be winning, we want to have or an illusionary, he says, talks about an illusionary idea of mastery. I thought was also kind of but just what you're saying about just speaking of listening, and of taking the time, and of being in tune, I think is really something pertinent, I think, to our practice now.
Can I add one thing? By agreeing with all of this, like I'm thinking in practice, and in practice, like Tina knows me very well. Sometimes I'm getting so angry with people sleeping so much because I don't sleep too much. And whenever you're doing something together, you want people to be awake, to live the life more with them. So there's also another side of it. Like I'm not proud of the fact that I sleep less, but I'm saying that sometimes life has its urgency, and you really want to live more rather than sleeping. So it's also kind of a bit, it brings this idea also, like some contradictions with the paces and the metabolisms of people.
Yes, and that also, that you also think that you're that if you're losing time by sleeping, that there's so much you want to do, that you don't have enough time to you don't have enough time to sleep. There's so much you want to do, there's so much you want to live as well. I get your point, Pesach. So it's this constant you're in this contradictory with yourself and your body. It's I think you
Yeah, I mean, so I know that it's a way of to live more and to sleep more. I know it. And it's also maybe annoying with all of your smartphones and so forth. Now they're trying to control your sleep, saying that you're not sleeping well, you're not doing this. And I think it's also another way of making you awake all the time with the fact that you're not sleeping. Yeah.
Or that even when you're even when that you was mentioning that she was trying to sleep but she was thinking about the text. Elise, I think, was saying this, that it was all in your that also is it really restful sleep, or is it sleep that's could be anxious sleep as well, that your thoughts are and I think probably a lot of us experience that too, that it's not necessarily always restful sleep.
Is it also maybe a question of, and I ask this partly to you, Basak, like, is it hard to trust that when you sleep or when you are not maybe there to register everything that happens, that still things happen or still important things happen? This is something I wonder also with relation to what we talked about before with being tuned in and listening and process or something. Sounds very prophetic, but I don't know, I think.
But I think it has cycles, and it has, how do you say, I think it's also based on the situation as well. Like, I'm getting more anxious when I'm traveling and when I'm somewhere new, because I want to explore more with people and spend more time with people. And then if you are, for instance, traveling with someone who sleeps 10 hours and you want to explore a lot, then it becomes a bit but what I'm saying is that at the moment, for the last year, we are all stuck at home, and my sleeping cycles change so much. Like, now I try to control it, but maybe it happened to all of you. But like, really sleeping 9 p.m. and then waking up at 11 and cannot sleep till 5 and then sleeping again. And I mean, I experienced such things, but now it's more or less more organized. But what I'm saying is that the situation always affects your sleeping habits as well. And of course, whom you are living with or whom you are sharing your lives with also shapes it a lot. And it comes to a point, also it comes to this privileged point, to what Noor was pointing out. I think it's also very important, like, who is allowed to sleep and who is not allowed to sleep.
Yeah, I think your point about our sleep patterns during this period, and even also kind of the difference when we're in a kind of complete lockdown, and this idea that what I think everybody's sleep became disrupted in complete lockdowns, or this kind of also even sometimes escapism into sleep, that you just kind of want to switch the world off and go into a space of sleep and comfort. But I think too, also when you're talking, remind me of the issue of also age, of this idea of permissibility. Because, for example, I mean, I don't know if you've been in kind of context when you have maybe people of different generations, but the way in which, like, for example, you might have an elderly person that will just fall asleep in their chair in the middle of like a family gathering, and how that's acceptable for us, is that their body has that need, or they also just want to tune out of the situation. And the same also with kind of young children, just find them, they'll just fall asleep on the couch. And the way in which age is also tied into these questions of sleep, and the periods in which we're supposed to be incredibly productive as well, I think is another dimension too.
Yeah, sure. While reading, it's around page 50, but just talking about I guess from a technology point of view, was just kind of talking about like surveillance mechanisms and how technology kind of aids a lot of sleeplessness under the guise of innovation. So the kinds of ways that technological advancements, are posited as these like great things that will improve productivity, and are like actually just incredibly sophisticated surveillance mechanisms that are like marketed towards all different kinds of businesses. I mean, I'm sure the implementation in like Amazon, but also very scary in just kind of any kind of online working environment. I don't think it would be. It's not too. It seems fairly accessible to get some kind of like eye monitoring kind of tech
Yeah,
software.
he was speaking about how that's crossed over from, I think, what was he saying, military research into marketing companies and huge companies being able to access this. Sorry, interrupt.
Yeah. No. I mean, just like that. That's like such a consistent relationship throughout so much of I think like different kinds of things that happen in throughout the world, is that this direct correlation between military innovation and then its translation over into like the larger capitalist space. Yeah, as some of the work that I do deals with technology and how technology kind of reproduces racism, and I work at it from a research and grassroots organizing collective, or I work within a collective to kind of analyze that and do storytelling as research, so asking people what their experiences are with technology and how it makes you feel. So that same kind of thing of like sleep also allows you to have, I think, access to a different kind of knowledge in terms of particularly like our affective knowledge and our knowledge around feeling what does that actually reveal to us? Like, how can we work with that knowledge? If it makes you just feel simply quite bad, like how, that's actually a really generative point to like do something different, to think about like there's such little time on the face of the earth, and I can't believe we're still invested in doing terrible things. So that's what I was thinking about with this, but I really like that just the consistent illumination of military into capitalism space is like really consistent.
I think his point in relation to technology was really interesting when he was talking about the idea of the invention of the wheel, the invention of the typewriter, and this idea that technological developments are always kind of seen as progress. And then he was talking about this idea of having the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age, and the way in which we're now in the digital age, and everybody will accommodate to that, and you have and the way in which technology is just taken as this given of progress, and that it's the way in which it's extracted from the context in which it's developed, and how he goes back to coupling it between military innovation and capitalism. And the way this, that he decouples this idea that it's always progress, that, and he questions those people who are writing that, saying, yes, you're okay, so you'll have the digital generation, they will come next, and they will catch up. And the way he was saying in which it's going to become impossible to catch up, because the innovation that's constantly what's happening in technology will always leave us in a lapse, and so we won't be able to. And then again, he couples that in another place with this idea and the way in which equipment only has a particular lifespan, and the way in which so much of our equipment has now a lifespan, and then we'll constantly have to update it, both in terms of status symbols, but the idea that that they become redundancy becomes also has a fast turnover now.
Yeah. If I can just add one more thing, because I know I'm sure we're coming up on time. But I think it also reveals also the real the ecological repercussions. I mean, like the advancement that almost reifies stratification, that reifies power dynamics, that reifies imperialism and colonialism, but also like the consistent need for new technology, and where is that technology being mined and at whose expense. So much of the minerals that come in our phones and in computers are largely mind, and those kinds of repercussions on people's lives is incredibly stark. Or even like the way trash is shipped from global north countries to global south countries, anything of that nature. So the technology thing just feels like a reification, like an advanced acceleration of existing power dynamics and largely like colonialism to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tina, it was amazing.
But I just want to thank you all very much. I very much enjoyed all the conversations with you. Yes, and please feel free, anyone who'd like to reach out about any ideas or anything, and I'll be more than happy to do tutorials with who'd like to have that. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Basak.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you.
Take care, and thank you everyone for all your time. Thank you.